Everyone in the room saw a waitress with scuffed shoes and a fraying apron. They saw someone they believed was barely worth the gum on the bottom of their Italian leather loafers. But when Avery Morgan, the billionaire CEO at Table 9, pulled out a merger contract worth $600 million, he didn't realize the man sitting across from him was about to steal his entire legacy with a single sentence hidden in the footnotes. No one saw it, not his Ivy League lawyers, not his trusted vice president. Only the woman refilling his sparkling water noticed the trap, and when she finally spoke, the room didn't just go silent. It froze. This is the story of how a nobody saved an empire. The rain in Seattle was relentless, a grey curtain that seemed to wash away the color of the city. But inside the Velvet Stag, the lighting was golden warm and smelled of money. It was the kind of steakhouse where a single baked potato cost more than Saoirse Horton's hourly wage. Saoirse adjusted her apron, wincing as a sharp pain shot up her left heel. She had been on her feet for 10 hours straight. Her shoes, bought from a discount bin at Walmart 2 years ago, were holding together by sheer willpower and a dab of superglue. Table 9 is yours, Horton, the floor manager. A man named Gerard, who wore too much cologne and had a wandering eye, snapped his fingers in her face. And try to look less like a funeral procession. These are VIPs, big money. Don't embarrass me. Saoirse nodded, keeping her eyes on the floor. Yes, Gerard. I mean it, Gerard hissed, leaning in. That's Avery Morgan, Morgan Logistics. If you mess up his order, you're not just fired. I'll make sure you never wait tables in this state again. Avery Morgan. The name was synonymous with American shipping. He was the kind of man whose face appeared on the cover of Forbes and the Wall Street Journal, usually accompanied by headlines about innovation and ruthless efficiency. Saoirse smoothed her hair back. She knew who he was. In a previous life, a life that felt like a fever dream, now she had studied his company's hostile takeover of a smaller logistics firm during her second year of law school. She had written a thesis on his aggressive acquisition strategies. But that was before the medical bills, before her mother's cancer, before the debt that swallowed her whole and the nervous breakdown that saw her walk away from a promising career at a top-tier Chicago law firm to scrub dishes and serve steaks just to keep the lights on. She took a deep breath, pasted on the service smile that didn't reach her tired brown eyes, and walked toward Table 9. The booth was the best in the house, secluded in a semi-private alcove with plush red leather seats. 3 men sat there. In the center was Avery Morgan. He looked older than his magazine photos, grayer with deep lines etched around his mouth and eyes that darted nervously around the room. He wasn't wearing a tie, but his suit likely cost more than Saoirse's entire year of rent. To his left was a younger man, perhaps mid-30s, with slicked-back blonde hair and a face that screamed privilege. This was Gregory Banks Morgan's chief financial officer. Saoirse recognized him from the tabloids. He was usually photographed on yachts or stumbling out of clubs in Ibiza. To the right sat a man Saoirse didn't recognize. He was heavy-set balding with a predatory stillness to him. He wore a pin-striped suit that looked a size too tight. "Water," Gregory said, without looking up as Saoirse approached. He was scrolling on his phone. "Sparkling. And if it's not San Pellegrino, don't bother pouring it." "Of course, sir," Saoirse said, her voice soft. "And bread," the heavy-set man grunted. "Fresh, not the stale stuff you feed the tourists." Avery Morgan didn't speak. He was staring at a thick stack of documents on the table, rubbing his temples as if he had a migraine that was splitting his skull in two. Saoirse moved efficiently, placing the crystal glasses down. As she reached for the water bottle, her wrist brushed against the edge of the leather booth. "Watch it," Gregory snapped, recoiling as if she had been radioactive. He brushed his sleeve aggressively. "God, do you people have no spatial awareness? That's vicuña wool." "I apologize, sir," Saoirse murmured, stepping back. "I didn't mean to. Just pour the water and disappear." Gregory sneered, finally looking at her. His eyes raked over her uniform. He smirked. "And maybe invest in some new shoes. The flapping sole is distracting. It sounds like a dying duck every time you walk away." The heavyset man chuckled a wet, unpleasant sound. Avery Morgan looked up, then his gaze briefly focusing on Saoirse. For a second there was a flicker of pity, but it was quickly extinguished by his own stress. "Greg, leave the girl alone. We have work to do." "Just setting standards, Avery," Greg replied, picking up his menu and tossing it onto the table with a dismissive thud. "If they can't get the footwear right, how can we trust the filet mignon?" Saoirse felt the heat rise in her cheeks, a familiar mix of shame and anger. She gripped the water pitcher tighter, her knuckles turning white. "Walk away," she told herself. "You need this tip. You need the rent money." She finished pouring the water in silence, turned on her broken heel and walked away. The sound of Gregory's laughter following her like a bad smell. The kitchen was a chaotic symphony of shouting chefs, clattering pans, and sizzling meat. Saoirse leaned against the stainless steel counter near the pass, trying to slow her heart rate. "They giving you trouble?" asked Mario, the sous chef, as he plated a lobster bisque. "Just the usual," Saoirse sighed. "Rich men who think waitresses are furniture." "Table 9, Mario whistled. "I heard that's the global tech merger. Big money. They say Morgan is selling 49% of his logistics empire to a conglomerate from Zurich. That guy with the pinstripes. That's Hans Gruber's uglier cousin, likely the buyer's attorney." Saoirse's ears perked up. A merger Morgan Logistics was a family-owned legacy. Avery Morgan had famously said he would never sell. Why now? She picked up the tray of appetizers, oysters Rockefeller and Wagyu beef carpaccio, and headed back out. As she approached the alcove, the conversation at table 9 had shifted from casual bullying to intense negotiation. The atmosphere was thick with tension. "The valuation is non-negotiable, Avery," Gregory was saying. Leaning forward, his voice hushed but urgent. "We need this liquidity. The Asia expansion drained us. If we don't sign with Zurich tonight, the board will have your head on a spike by Monday morning." Avery looked defeated. He swirled his scotch, staring into the amber liquid. "I built this company from a single warehouse, Greg. My father drove trucks, I drove trucks, and now I'm signing away half of it to a holding company that specializes in stripping assets." "You're not signing it away," the heavy-set man, the lawyer, said smoothly. His accent was thick Germanic, but polished. "You are bringing in a strategic partner. We are saving you, Mr. Morgan. The market is volatile. This contract secures your legacy." Saoirse placed the oysters down. The lawyer, whose name she saw on a briefcase tag, was Werner Voss, barely moved his arm to make space. "Refill," Avery said, tapping his glass. Saoirse moved to his side. As she poured the wine, a 2005 Chateau Margaux that cost $800, she looked down at the documents spread across the table. It was a standard merger and acquisition agreement, but the formatting was dense aggressive. Single-spaced size 10 font. It was designed to be skimmed, not read. I don't like the timeline on the asset transfer, Avery muttered, pointing a trembling finger at page 40. It says, immediate control of the intellectual property upon signature. We agreed to a 6-month transition. Werner Voss smiled a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Standard boilerplate, Avery. It's a formality for the bank loans. We won't exercise control until the transition period is over. You have my word. Your word isn't in the contract, Werner, Avery snapped. He was smarter than he looked, but he was exhausted. It is covered in the addendum, Gregory interjected quickly. Too quickly. I read it, Avery. Clause 22 covers the transition. Trust me. I've had legal go over this 3 times. It's ironclad. Saoirse froze. The bottle of wine hovered over the glass. Clause 22. In her old life, Saoirse had specialized in international contract law. She knew M&A structures better than she knew her own family history. Clause 22 was usually a distraction, a generic operational clause. The real teeth of a predatory contract were never in the main clauses. They were always buried in the definitions or the indemnity sections. Hey, Gregory barked. Are you going to pour that, or are you waiting for the grapes to ferment again? Saoirse snapped back to reality. Apologies, sir. She poured the wine, careful not to spill a drop. Get lost, Gregory muttered. Saoirse retreated to the service station, but she didn't leave the area. She stood behind a decorative pillar pretending to polish silverware. She had a bad feeling, a visceral gut instinct she hadn't felt since her days in the courtroom. Gregory Banks was sweating. It was cool in the restaurant, but beads of perspiration were forming on his upper lip. He kept checking his watch. He wasn't acting like a CFO, protecting his CEO. He was acting like a getaway driver, waiting for the bank robbery to finish. I need a pen, Avery announced. I think I'm ready. Excellent decision, Werner Voss said, reaching into his jacket and producing a heavy Mont Blanc pen. This will ensure Morgan Logistics survives for another century. Avery took the pen. His hand was shaking. Saoirse watched from 10 feet away. She shouldn't care. These people mocked her. They treated her like dirt. If Avery Morgan signed his company away, it wouldn't change the fact that her rent was late. It wasn't her problem. But it was. It was the injustice of it. The way Voss smiled like a shark. The way Gregory Banks looked at Avery with hidden contempt. Avery flipped to the back page. He hovered the pen over the signature line. Wait. Avery hesitated. I want to double-check the liability cap on the shipping errors. If we merge, do I retain personal liability for the existing fleet lawsuits? No. Gregory laughed nervously. That's all transferred to the new entity. You're clear, Avery. You're free. Just sign. Avery nodded slowly. He lowered the pen. Saoirse couldn't stop herself. She didn't make a conscious decision to move. Her legs just carried her. She walked past the pillar, past the empty table 8, and right up to the VIP booth. She didn't have a water pitcher. She didn't have a menu. She had nothing in her hands. Excuse me, Saoirse said. Her voice was quiet but steady. The 3 men looked up. Werner Voss looked annoyed. Avery looked confused. Gregory looked murderous. We didn't call for you, Gregory hissed. We are in the middle of a private transaction. Leave, now, or I am getting the manager. I'm sorry to interrupt, Saoirse said, her eyes locking onto Avery Morgan. But before you sign that, you might want to look at page 114, subsection C, paragraph 4. Silence. Absolute suffocating silence. Gregory's face went from pale to beet red. What did you just say? Page 114, Saoirse repeated, her voice gaining strength. The force majeure definitions. You have got to be kidding me. Gregory laughed, a high-pitched, incredulous sound. Avery, this waitress is giving legal advice. This is rich. This is actually hilarious. Go away, sweetheart. Go scrub something. Who are you? Avery asked, frowning. He didn't look angry. He looked curious. I'm just the waitress, Saoirse said. But I couldn't help but overhear you discussing the IP transfer delay. Your CFO said it's covered in Clause 22. It is, Gregory snapped. It might be referenced there, Saoirse said, ignoring Gregory and speaking directly to Avery. But in these types of cross-border mergers, the definitions section overrides the operational clauses if they have defined immediate transfer events to include signature of agreement on page 114, then clause 22 is null and void the second your ink hits that paper. Werner Voss went still. The predatory smile vanished. He slowly closed the folder on the table, covering the text. This is preposterous, Voss said, his voice dropping an octave. Avery, are you going to let the help delay a $600 million deal? She is likely high on drugs. Look at her shoes. My shoes are old, Saoirse said, cutting him off. But my eyes are fine, and I saw the header on page 114 when you flipped through it earlier. It's a Zurich Standard indemnity loop. They used it in the Kruger-Vance takeover in 2019. Avery Morgan froze. The Kruger takeover, that company was liquidated 3 months after the merger. Exactly, Saoirse said, because the CEO thought he had 6 months to restructure. He didn't know he had given up voting rights the moment he signed because of a definitions loophole. Avery. Gregory slammed his hand on the table, rattling the silverware. This is insane. She's lying. She's crazy. I'm calling Gerard. Gregory raised his hand and snapped his fingers aggressively toward the front of the restaurant. Manager now! Gerard. The manager came running. He saw the tension, the red face of Gregory Banks, and the defiance of Saoirse Horton. What is the meaning of this? Gerard gasped. Saoirse, what are you doing bothering Mr. Morgan? She is harassing us, Gregory shouted, standing up. She is reading our private documents. I want her fired. I want her thrown out on the street right now. Saoirse, get your things, Gerard snarled, grabbing her arm roughly. You're done. Get out. Wait. The voice was quiet, but it commanded the room. Avery Morgan hadn't moved. He was staring at Saoirse. Then slowly, he reached out and moved Werner Voss's hand off the contract. Avery, don't waste your time. Gregory pleaded, sweat now pouring down his face. Avery ignored him. He flipped the heavy document over. He wetted his thumb and began to count pages. 100, 110, 112, 114. He scanned the page. His eyes narrowed. He read the tiny print at the bottom, the section labeled Definitions of Operational Continuity. Avery's face turned the color of ash. He read it again. Then he looked up at Werner Voss. Paragraph 4, Avery whispered. Notwithstanding any other clause, all intellectual property and voting rights transfer to the buyer immediately upon execution of this agreement if the seller has a debt-to-equity ratio greater than 2.0. Avery looked at Gregory. Greg, what is our current debt-to-equity ratio? Gregory swallowed hard. He tugged at his collar. Well, with the Asia losses, it's hovering around 2.1. But that's temporary. You knew. Avery said, his voice trembling with rage. You knew this clause was triggered immediately. Avery hired her to forge documents. Did I also forge the bank transfers? Saoirse asked, raising an eyebrow. Or the recording? The room went deathly silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop humming. What recording? Gregory whispered, the colour draining from his face. Saoirse pulled a small silver digital drive from her pocket. She held it up to the light. It was a bluff, mostly. It was an encrypted drive containing the server logs, but Gregory didn't know that. He only knew that he had made calls he shouldn't have made in rooms he thought were safe. Avery's office has voice-activated security. Saoirse lied smoothly. She banked on the paranoia of a guilty man. We have audio of you admitting to the kickback structure yesterday afternoon. Gregory's eyes darted around the room. He saw the board members looking at the bank transfer documents. He saw Thomas Halloway reading the email where Gregory had mocked the board, calling them dinosaurs who would sign anything for a dividend. The walls were closing in. You, Gregory pointed a shaking finger at Avery. You set me up. No, Avery said from his seat. You set yourself up. I just hired someone smart enough to turn on the lights. I move for a vote of no confidence. Gregory yelled, his voice shrill with desperation. In Avery, right now, he is unfit. He is sabotaging the deal. Sit down, Greg, Thomas Halloway said. The chairman's voice was ice cold. He didn't look up from the papers Saoirse had provided. Thomas, listen to me. These are fakes. I said sit down. Halloway roared, slamming his hand on the table. Saoirse stepped forward, closing the distance between herself and the cornered CFO. She had one final card to play. The checkmate. There is one more thing, she said softly so only he and the nearby members could hear. I checked the 1998 corporate bylaws, the ones your father helped write when he sat on this very board. Gregory looked at her confusion mixing with his fear. What? There is a moral turpitude clause, Saoirse said, a small, cold smile touching her lips. It was designed to protect the company from executives who act in bad faith. If an executive is found to be acting against the company for personal gain, not only are they terminated for cause, she leaned in closer, but their unvested stock options are forfeited and returned to the employee pension pool. Gregory's face went white. Those options were worth $20 million. They were his entire net worth. They were his life. You can't, he whispered, his voice trembling. It's in the contract, Saoirse said, tapping the leather folder on the table. Clause 4, Section B. Maybe if you spent less time mocking the help and more time reading the paperwork, you would have known that. The silence that descended upon the boardroom was heavier than the mahogany table that dominated the space. It was a physical weight pressing down on the lungs of every man in the room. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light, cutting through the panoramic windows, the only things moving in a room paralyzed by shock. Gregory Banks sat frozen, his hand still hovering over the damning documents Saoirse had slid across the polished wood. His mouth opened and closed rhythmically, like a fish pulled from water, but the slick, confident words that usually flowed from him had evaporated. He looked from the bylaws to Thomas Halloway, searching for an ally, a lifeline, anything to pull him back from the precipice. But Thomas Halloway was not looking at Gregory with friendship. He was looking at him with the terrifying cold rage of a man who realizes he has been played. Halloway's face, usually a composed mask of corporate indifference, was a mottled purple. Is this true? Halloway demanded. His voice started low, a rumble in his chest, before rising to shake the heavy glass water pitchers on the table. Did you leverage your own stock options against a short position on our fleet? Were you betting on our insolvency? Gregory flinched, as if struck. He tugged at his collar, which suddenly seemed to be strangling him. Sweat beaded on his forehead, dripping down to stain the pristine starch of his white shirt. "Thomas, please, you have to understand the nuance." Gregory squeaked, his voice cracking. "It was complex financial engineering. A hedge. I was merely protecting my personal assets against market volatility. It's standard practice for—" "You were betting against us," Avery Morgan interrupted. Avery's voice wasn't loud, but it cut through Gregory's stammering like a razor. Avery stood up slowly. Gone was the slumped posture of the tired, defeated old man who had sat in the restaurant booth the night before. In his place stood the titan of industry who had built Morgan Logistics from a single truck. He loomed over the table, radiating a cold, hard power that made the other board members shrink into their high-backed leather chairs. "You weren't hedging against the market, Gregory," Avery continued, his eyes locked on his CFO. "You were betting on my failure. You were engineering it." Avery looked around the table, meeting the eyes of every director. "I call for a vote. Motion to terminate Gregory Banks for cause effective immediately, and pursuant to Article 4, Section B of the 1998 Bylaws, forfeiture of all unvested equity to the Employee Pension Fund." "Seconded," Holloway barked, instantly eager to distance himself from the sinking ship. "All in favor?" Avery asked. The hesitation in the room lasted less than a heartbeat. Even Gregory's staunchest allies, the men he had wined and dined for years, smelled the blood in the water. They knew that to support him now was professional suicide. One by one, 12 hands went up. Gregory watched the hands rise like a firing squad, taking aim. He let out a strangled sound, half sob, half growl. "Security," Avery said into the table intercom. His tone was bored, as if ordering a sandwich. The double doors swung open with a heavy thud, and 2 burly security officers entered. They didn't need to be told who the target was. Gregory was the only one vibrating with panic. As they flanked him, the reality finally shattered Gregory's composure. "This isn't over," Gregory screamed, scrambling backward and knocking his expensive leather chair over with a crash. He flailed as the guards took him by the arms. "I'll sue. I'll burn this place to the ground." "You hear me, Avery? You're nothing without me. You're a dinosaur." As the guards dragged him toward the door, his heels skidding on the plush carpet, Gregory locked eyes with Saoirse. His face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated venom. "And you," he shrieked, spitting the words at her. "You're just a waitress. You're a nobody. You serve steaks. You don't belong here." Saoirse didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She stood tall at the head of the table, her hand resting firmly on the leather-bound contract that had saved the company. She looked at the man who had mocked her shoes, her station, and her existence. "I'm the woman who just read the fine print you were too arrogant to ignore," she said calmly, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the room. "Goodbye, Gregory." The heavy doors slammed shut, severing his screams from the room. The silence returned, but this time it was different. It wasn't heavy. It was the vacuum left after a storm. The board members shifted uncomfortably, avoiding Avery's gaze, terrifyingly aware that the waitress had just outmaneuvered them all. Avery exhaled a long breath, adjusting his cuffs. He turned to the board, his expression steely. "The Zurich deal is dead. We will restructure. We will take the short-term hit, but we will keep the company, and we will keep our integrity." He turned to Saoirse. The hardness in his eyes melted away, replaced by a profound respect. "And I believe we have a vacancy for a general counsel." Avery said, his voice warm. "The previous one seems to have been escorted out of the building. I need someone who knows the law, someone who isn't afraid to fight, and someone who actually reads the footnotes." Saoirse looked at him, feeling the weight of the moment. It wasn't just a job offer. It was an acknowledgement of the person she had fought to remain, even when the world tried to grind her down. "I'd be honored, Avery," she said softly. 3 hours later, the atmosphere couldn't have been more different. Saoirse Horton pushed open the heavy oak doors of the Velvet Stag. A wall of sound and scent hit her instantly, the clatter of silverware, the low hum of conversation, the smell of searing ribeyes and expensive red wine. It was the peak of the dinner rush. Waiters in black vests darted between tables like frantic ants. The air was thick with the stress she knew so well, the pressure to be invisible, to be fast, to be perfect. Gerard, the manager, was standing at the host podium, furiously tapping on the reservation screen, while berating a young busboy for a smudge on a water glass. When he looked up and saw Saoirse, the colour drained from his face as if someone had pulled a plug. News travelled at the speed of light in the city's service industry. Gerard had heard the rumours. He knew she had left with Avery Morgan. He knew the billionaire lawyer had been fired. He just hadn't expected the ghost of Table 9 to walk back through his front door. "Saoirse," Gerard stammered, putting on a smile that looked more like a grimace of pain. We were wondering where you were. You missed your shift. I assume you're here to pick up your final tips." Saoirse stood in the entrance. She looked down at the scuffed floorboards where she had stood for countless hours, her feet throbbing in agony, swallowing her pride for minimum wage. She looked at Table 9, where a new group of businessmen were laughing, swirling their cognac, completely oblivious to the war that had been fought in that booth 24 hours ago. "No, Gerard," Saoirse said, her voice cool and steady. "I'm not here for the tips." She reached into her handbag, no longer the worn tote she used to carry, but the sleek leather briefcase Avery had given her, and pulled out a check. "I'm here to settle my tab," she said. Gerard blinked, confused. You don't have a tab, Saoirse." "I'm opening one," she replied enigmatically. She walked past him, ignoring his sputtered questions, and headed straight for the double swing doors of the kitchen. The kitchen was a chaotic inferno. Steam rose from the massive pots, and the shouts of "order up" and "behind" filled the air. But as Saoirse walked in, the rhythm faltered. Mario, the sous chef, looked up from a sizzling pan of scallops. He wiped his hands on his apron, his eyes widening. "Saoirse," Mario asked, a grin breaking across his tired face. "You look different. You look tall. You look like a boss." "I am Mario." She smiled, a genuine warm smile. "I finally am." She turned toward the back to the dishwashing station. It was the hottest, wettest, most miserable corner of the restaurant. A young girl named Maria was there, bent over a sink full of grey water, scrubbing a burnt pot. Her shoulders were shaking. She was crying, her tears mixing with the dishwater. Maria was new. She was terrified. She was exactly who Saoirse had been 2 years ago. "Maria," Saoirse said gently. The girl jumped, dropping the steel wool. She spun around, eyes wide with fear. "I'm sorry, I'm scrubbing as fast as I can." "Please don't tell Gerard." "Take off the apron, Maria," Saoirse said, her voice soft but firm. I can't," Maria whispered, trembling. "I need this job. My rent is late. If I lose this, Saoirse stepped forward and took the girl's red-chapped hands in hers. She pressed a thick white envelope into them. Inside was $5,000, the remainder of the cash Avery had given her the night before. "This is for your rent," Saoirse said, locking eyes with the girl. "And this." She pulled a crisp business card from her pocket. "Morgan Logistics, Saoirse Horton, General Counsel." "Call this number on Monday morning," Saoirse instructed. "We need receptionists. We need people who work hard and notice the details. You won't be scrubbing dishes anymore." Maria stared at the money, then at the card, then at Saoirse. The realization hit her slowly, and she let out a sob, collapsing into Saoirse's arms. Saoirse held her tight, feeling the dampness of the girl's uniform, remembering the despair that had once been her only companion. "It gets better," Saoirse whispered into her ear. "I promise." Saoirse pulled away, patted Maria's shoulder and turned to leave. She walked back out through the kitchen, through the dining room, and stopped at the host stand where Gerard was still hovering, looking as if he might faint from anxiety. "I quit," Saoirse said simply. Gerard nodded frantically. "Right. Yes, of course." "Anything else?" Saoirse paused. She looked at the floor near the VIP section. "Fix the loose floorboard near table 9, Gerard," she said. "Someone might trip, and people like us, we can't afford to fall." She pushed open the front door and stepped out into the night. The rain had stopped. The Seattle sky, usually a suffocating blanket of grey, was clear. The city lights reflected off the wet pavement, turning the streets into rivers of gold. The air tasted crisp and clean, smelling of ozone and possibility. Saoirse looked down at her feet. She was still wearing the cheap glued-together shoes from Walmart. They pinched her toes. The sole was flapping slightly. She raised her hand and hailed a passing taxi. "Where to, lady?" the driver asked as she slid into the back seat. Saoirse leaned back, watching the lights of the Velvet Stag fade into the distance. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the air of a life reclaimed. "The shopping district," Saoirse said, a smile playing on her lips. "I need to buy a pair of Italian leather heels. I have a board meeting tomorrow." Saoirse Horton went from being mocked for her broken shoes to running the boardroom of $1 billion company, all because she refused to let her circumstances define her intelligence. She proved that the most valuable asset in any room isn't the suit you wear, but the mind you possess. Gregory Banks learned that arrogance is a blindfold, and Avery Morgan learned that sometimes the person who can save you is the one you've been ignoring. It's a powerful reminder. Treat everyone with respect, because you never know who is reading the fine print of your life. If you enjoyed this story of karma and justice, please smash that like button. It helps us create more stories like this for you. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a video. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that the underdog can win. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next story.